pain from the ongoing government shutdown spreading to airports across the United States. Right now, a nationwide flight reduction is in effect. The FAA is forcing cuts at dozens of America's largest airports, citing safety concerns as air traffic controllers are working without pay. More than 800 flights have already been canceled. Here's what travelers are saying.
It's difficult to understand how they just can't figure this out. You know, it's going to impact everybody.
Hopefully they'll get back to normal, traveling and everything else.
I can't imagine an airport like this that is so busy, all those flights being canceled. So I'm nervous.
I'm a nervous traveler anyway, a nervous flyer, and you know, you want to know that the people that are keeping you safe are being taken care of, and they're just not.
Hawaii is not a terrible place to get stuck, but we don't want to get stuck away from our dog and away from our home, so we're hopeful we'll be able to get back on Tuesday.
Would you be open to getting a backup ticket?
You got to have backup money. I don't have that.
The Trump administration is forcefully pushing back on criticism, instead blaming Congress. Here's what the Transportation Secretary just said.
There's an easy answer. Open up the government. Stop this. Why are senators going home? If you can vote 14 times to keep the government shut down and create this gridlock in our airports, and you're going to go home, they should sit here. Like Americans sit in airports, they should sit in their offices. They should sit in the Senate and figure out how they're going to come up with a deal to open this back up and not use the American people as leverage.
Let's go live right now to CNN's Jason Carroll. He's over at Newark International Airport. That's one of the several airports where delays have been reported this morning. Jason, how are things going there right now?
Well, Wolf, we've also just gotten word this morning that the Newark Control Tower is going to be short-staffed until at least 2 o'clock this afternoon. Also, another update, there are now 45-minute delays inbound to Newark, so that just gives you a sense of what we're already experiencing here on the ground. We've already heard from a number of people very frustrated about their travel experience. All this due to the FAA deciding to cut flights to 40 of the busiest airports across the country, including all of New York City area airports, Newark included in that, obviously, Chicago, Miami, Los Angeles, Memphis. Chances are, Wolf, if you know someone who's traveling today, you probably know someone who's going to be affected by this in some way, shape, or form. Hearing from the airlines, they're canceling flights. Delta 170, United 200, American 220 flights canceled, Southwest more than 100 flights canceled. We've been speaking to people all morning long. I spoke to one woman, she's a doctor, trying to get back to Utah. Just listen to how frustrated she was about her travel experience.
I'm renting a car. I have to be back in Utah by Tuesday, and from what I hear with the counters, the airline counters and TSA, they literally said to me, if I were you, I wouldn't travel over the next 3 days.
And guess what, Wolf, Pamela, I followed up with her. She wasn't able to rent a car. She ended up having to get a U-Haul. She said now she's going to be using that to drive across country. Just some of the desperate measures people are using to get where they need to go. Wolf, Pamela.
Terrible situation indeed. Jason Carroll over at Newark Airport, Pamela.
So all of this raises that question, right? If you have plans to fly, what should you do? Joining us now is Sean Cudahy, senior aviation reporter for The Points Guy.
Sean, first off, who should be most concerned right now?
You know, I think I would be most concerned if I were someone who was flying this weekend on a connecting itinerary, so like a two-leg trip. You know, take Delta, for example. You heard there are 170 cancellations today. By my count, about 80% of those are its Delta Connection regional jets, those smaller planes. We are not right now seeing airlines cancel these long-haul international flights to Europe, by and large. They're going more for these smaller planes that carry fewer passengers to rebook there. But obviously, a lot of those flights around the country, and it's a big inconvenience right now.
So if your flight is canceled or significantly delayed, what's the first move? What are your rights as a traveler?
Yeah, so keep in mind, every traveler, if their flight's canceled, significantly delayed, to your point, you are owed a refund under federal policy. And the Department of Transportation yesterday really kind of went out and reminded travelers that they are owed a refund, you know, if they run into these flight troubles. Really supposed to be no questions asked, money back to you within 7 days if you booked by a credit card. The other thing that I would be doing is just staying glued to my airline mobile app, to my email. opt in to all of the push notifications. We're hearing from a lot of airlines they've kind of beefed up their tech in recent years, and a lot of these communications that they're sending out to travelers are kind of coming through those digital channels. You might be able to avoid waiting on hold with the airline. Just rebook yourself with a few taps.
Sean, it's interesting. We're already seeing the effects of this 4% reduction, with more than 800 flights already canceled today. FlightAware's misery map is showing airport delays nationwide. If the shutdown continues, airlines will be cutting 10% of flights by next Friday. How much worse will things look then?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think about some of the worst snowstorms that we've had in pockets of the country at times. That's kind of when you've seen cancellations climb to, to that rate. The difference, though, is that this is going to affect a large swath of the country, the entire country virtually. We've talked a lot about the 40 airports that the FAA is focusing its cuts on, but when you see the cancellations that are actually getting, put in place by airlines, the reality is that this is affecting almost every airport across the country. We're even seeing, obviously, cuts, from Alaska to Hawaii. So, this is really, going to be, an increasing hurdle for travelers and certainly for airlines scrambling to make these changes here over the coming days.
And we heard the transportation secretary say today that there could be this ripple effect. Even if the government shutdown ends very soon, there's still that ripple effect, right? You've had air traffic controllers resign. It takes a while to get everything back up and running the way it was before, right? So then you have to ask, well, what about Thanksgiving? It's less than 3 weeks away. Should people be thinking about driving if they can instead of flying?
Yeah, it's a great question. I spoke with a longtime air traffic controller and air traffic control instructor yesterday, and yeah, she kind of concurred with that point that even if the government shutdown were to end somehow in the next day or two here, there's likely going to be some residual impact here. And keep in mind, today really marks kind of 2 weeks from what airlines consider to be the start of the Thanksgiving travel rush. I don't know that at this point I would be telling travelers not to fly for Thanksgiving. I think it kind of remains, hopefully we would see some improvement if the government were to open in short order. But I mean, you've heard the head of the top air traffic controllers union point out that, there's really no telling how disruptive this could be if the shutdown were to continue weeks more into the holiday season here. And what is expected, or was expected at least by all accounts, to be a record-setting Thanksgiving travel rush.
Yeah, he was just on our show yesterday making that point.
And it's clear they got to reopen the government and get this thing back to normal quickly. That's very, very important.
Abundantly clear. Sean Cudahy, thank you so much. Let's go live now to CNN's Whitney Wild at one of the nation's busiest airports, O'Hare International in Chicago. Whitney, tell us what it's like there.
Here it is calm. There's only dozens of flights that are either canceled or delayed. In total, there are between 78 and 80 flights that are either canceled coming into or out of O'Hare, and then there's a few dozen more delays here. Let me take you on a walk over to the board here so you can see. I mean, I think all things considered, when you think about what this could look like across the country, that there are more than 800 flights that are canceled and thousands, more than 1,000 that are delayed. This board is looking pretty good. There are about 10 flights that are delayed right now at O'Hare. And then when you look at the security line, it's still running about 5 minutes through security. So this is about as good as you can get on any day, really, let alone on a day or when we know across the country there are some major travel problems. What's interesting about thinking about the story here in Chicago is when you think about cancellations here and you think about delays, immediately you think, well, that's usually because there's a massive weather event. Chicago gets slammed with snow. That's usually the times we see travel disruptions here at O'Hare, but instead it is a crystal clear blue day. In theory, this should be a perfect day to fly, but instead there's this man-made pressure disrupting the system here. We spoke with a couple who's traveling today. Their flight's not canceled. As we know, news about cancellations have been going on for several days now, so people have been able to adjust their flight plans to account for that. But here's what one couple told us about their frustrations.
Yeah, we know about the cuts and potential cancellations of flights, but we're just hoping to get lucky on both trips each way. 10%. Reopen the government. Yeah.
What do you think? I think the airlines are handling it well, though, as best as they can given the circumstances. So I appreciate them keeping us all safe. And yeah, they should come to an agreement and reopen the government and avoid all of this. But
It's not just FAA workers who are going without pay. Remember, it's TSA officers as well. And what we saw earlier this week, or last week, was these really long lines in Houston where there were TSA officers who simply couldn't come into work. And so that is the major question here. So earlier this week, we spoke with a union rep from TSA as well as a woman who was a TSA officer. The TSA officer had to quit. She simply couldn't afford to come to a job that wasn't paying her. And the union representative made very clear his concern is that if this continues to drag on, more TSA officers are going to have to call out sick because they can't afford the childcare, can't afford the gas required to come to work. Or his other major concern is that more TSA officers are just going to have to quit because this job, which is supposed to be stable, is just too volatile. And when you think about what that means as you're going into the very busy travel season between Thanksgiving and Christmas, that's where those TSA representatives are concerned. The TSA union representatives are concerned that there could be major chaos down the line. Back to you guys.
Understandably. Whitney Wild in Chicago, thanks so much.